A 12-year-old black boy was sitting quietly in a luxury hotel lobby, waiting for his mother. He wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't lost. He was simply sitting, backpack on his shoulders, a small NASA pin on the strap, waiting for the woman who cleaned those very floors to finish her shift. That was enough for the hotel manager to walk across the marble floor, stop in front of the child, and demand he open his bag. $100 had gone missing from the cash drawer, and in Gerald Price's mind, the answer was already standing right in front of him. A black boy, alone, in a place men like Price had decided boys like him didn't belong. His mother came through the service door just in time to watch it happen. 6 years of invisible mornings. 6 years of service elevators and folded towels and swallowed dignity. And now this. Her son, accused. In the building where she had never once been late. She stood her ground. And then her boy, quiet, 12 years old, impossibly calm, began to speak. He described the camera angles, the timestamps, the 3 minutes that told the real story. The lobby went completely still. And then the elevator opened, and the most dangerous man in that building, a Korean Mafia boss with tattoos climbing up his neck, worth more money than the entire hotel, walked across that marble floor, stopped in front of that black child, and bowed. Not to power, not to wealth, to character. What happened next will stay with you. Before we begin, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a member and help our channel. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The rain had not stopped since morning. It fell against the tall glass windows of the Grandview Tower in long, pale sheets, and the sound of it filled the lobby like a kind of breathing, slow, indifferent, continuous. The marble floors reflected the chandelier light in broken pieces, and the men and women who moved across them did so with the particular confidence of people who had never once been asked to leave a room they had every right to be in. Loretta Hayes was not one of those people. She had learned that early. She had learned it the way most lessons of that kind are learned, not in a single moment of cruelty, but across 1,000 small ones, accumulated over years like sediment, pressing down until a person either breaks or becomes something harder than what they started as. Loretta had become harder. Not bitter. Harder. There is a difference, and she knew it, and she carried it in the straight line of her back and the quiet set of her jaw, and the way her hands never trembled, even when everything inside her was shaking. 6 years she had worked inside those walls. 6 years of early mornings and service elevators and corridors that smelled of other people's perfume and other people's lives. She had cleaned rooms where the bed had not been slept in because the guest had simply not bothered to come back. She had folded towels into shapes that no one would notice until they unfolded them. She had replaced flowers that were still alive because the arrangement had grown asymmetrical by half an inch. She had done all of this without complaint, without error, and without a single person on the upper floors ever learning her last name. She was Loretta to the housekeeper supervisor. She was the maid on 7 to the front desk. She was invisible to everyone else. And her son had inherited none of that invisibility. Elijah Hayes walked into the world the way certain people do, with his eyes already open, already counting, already filing away the angle of every camera lens and the distance between every exit, and the number of seconds it took for an elevator to descend from the 14th floor to the lobby. He was 12 years old, and he could not stop himself from seeing things. It was not something he had chosen. It was simply what his mind did with the world. Sorted it, measured it, remembered it with a fidelity that his teachers called remarkable, and his classmates called strange, and that Loretta, in the privacy of the small apartment where they lived, called her greatest fear and her greatest pride in the same breath. He had come straight from school that afternoon, his backpack heavy with books he had already read twice, the small NASA pin on the strap catching the lobby light as he pushed through the revolving door and stepped out of the rain. He had walked to the concierge desk and asked, politely, where the restrooms were located. The young attendant had pointed without looking up. Elijah had said, "Thank you." He had gone and returned and chosen a bench near the east wall. Not in the center of the lobby, not near the entrance, not anywhere that could reasonably be described as disruptive. And he had sat down and unzipped his bag and begun to wait. He was good at waiting. He had been waiting his whole life in one form or another. Gerald Price came across the lobby with the rolling, self-satisfied gait of a man who had just resolved something minor and was already searching for something else to resolve. His eyes moved the way they always moved, sweeping, cataloging, finding the thing that did not belong. The potted fern near the elevator that had dropped a leaf. The luggage cart left 2 inches from the wall instead of flush against it. The small details that gave him reasons to speak and, in speaking, remind everyone within earshot that he was the one who noticed. And then he noticed Elijah. The boy sitting straight-backed on the bench, mochila in his lap, pin on his strap, eyes moving steadily across the lobby ceiling with the calm attention of a child who is not lost, not waiting for trouble, not doing anything at all except existing in a space that Gerald Price had decided, before a single word was spoken, that he did not belong in. Price crossed the marble floor. His footsteps were deliberate, and the story, from that moment, had already been set in motion. Though no one in that lobby, not even the man walking toward the boy, understood yet what kind of story it was going to be. The question came out dressed as concern. That was the thing about Gerald Price. He had spent enough years in management to understand that the most effective cruelties were the ones that arrived with a reasonable face. He did not storm across the lobby. He did not raise his voice. He walked with measured steps and stopped at a distance that was close enough to be confrontational, but far enough to be deniable. And he tilted his head slightly to the right, the way a man does when he is performing patience rather than feeling it. And he said, in a tone that was almost gentle, almost curious, almost nothing at all, "What are you doing here, son?" Elijah looked up. He had heard that tone before. Not from this man, not in this building, but from enough men in enough places that his body recognized it the way it recognized cold. Not with surprise, but with a kind of bracing. A small internal adjustment. The way a person shifts their weight before a wave hits. He answered plainly. He said he was waiting for his mother. He said she worked there. He said her name. And something shifted in Gerald Price's face. Not visibly, not in any way that could be pointed to or described to a supervisor or documented in a complaint. But it shifted. Because the answer had not given him what he needed the answer to give him. He had expected confusion, or defensiveness, or the particular nervous energy that he had learned to interpret as guilt, even when it was only fear. Instead, he had received a clear, calm, complete sentence from a 12-year-old boy who was looking at him without blinking, and that, somehow, was worse. He told the boy that employees did not receive visitors in the lobby. The boy said it was raining. Price said there was a covered entrance. The boy looked at the window. Then he looked back, and in that half-second of looking, that quiet, assessing pause, Gerald Price felt something he would never have named out loud, and barely acknowledged even to himself. He felt, briefly and miserably, as though he were the one being evaluated. He did not like it. He was still deciding what to say next when the attendant from the concierge desk appeared at his elbow, young and nervous, and carrying the particular energy of someone trying to make a problem someone else's problem before it became fully his own. He spoke quietly. He said there was a discrepancy at the cash drawer, $100 bill. He said the boy had been near the desk earlier. He said it with the careful vagueness of a man who wants to imply without being held accountable for the implication. Price turned back to Elijah, and now his face had something in it that the earlier performance had been missing. Now it had certainty. The specific, terrible certainty of a man who believes he has just been handed a reason that was, in fact, always a justification in waiting. He said the words slowly. He said he needed the boy to open his bag. The lobby did not go silent all at once. It went silent in pieces. The receptionist who stopped typing. The bellboy who stopped moving. The two guests near the fountain who lowered their voices without knowing why. The silence assembled itself around the scene the way silence always does around something that everyone present can feel is wrong, but no one has yet decided to say is wrong. Loretta came through the service door at the far end of the lobby 30 seconds later. She always moved quickly between tasks. Efficiency was not optional when there were 14 rooms left on the floor and 2 hours until end of shift. But something made her slow before she fully understood what she was seeing. Some frequency in the air. The particular quality of that assembled silence. She had felt it before, in other rooms, in other years, and her body knew what it meant before her mind had finished processing the image of her son standing alone in the center of the lobby with a man in a gray suit pointing at his backpack. She let go of the cart. She walked toward them. And when Price turned to acknowledge her, he used the voice again. The reasonable voice, the managerial voice, the voice that was performing calm for an audience while doing something else entirely. And he explained the situation the way a man explains a situation when he has already decided the outcome. He said there was a discrepancy. He said it was routine. He said the word routine the way people say it when they want something to feel smaller than it is. Loretta looked at her son. Elijah looked back at her. His face said, "I am all right." She knew he was lying. She had taught him that particular lie. She had needed it herself for so many years that she had passed it on without meaning to, the way parents pass on the things they most wish they didn't have to. She turned back to Price, and she said, with a quietness that was not submission and not defeat, but something altogether different, something that had been compressed over 6 years of service elevators and invisible mornings into a single, immovable sentence. She said, "My son did not take anything." Price opened his mouth, and Elijah spoke first. The boy's voice did not rise. That was what made the lobby go completely still. Not the words themselves, though the words were precise enough to stop a man cold, but the register in which they were delivered. Quiet, unhurried, the voice of someone who has measured the room and already knows its dimensions, while everyone else is still finding the walls. Elijah Hayes spoke the way certain people speak when they have learned that volume is a tool of the uncertain, and that the truly certain do not need it. He said, "The camera above the concierge desk is angled 12 degrees to the right of its standard position." He said it the way someone states a fact about the weather. Price blinked. Elijah continued. He said that a camera at that angle does not capture the cash drawer. He said it captures the lateral corridor to the left of the desk. He said he had noticed this when he entered, because he noticed angles the way other people notice color, and that it was not something he had decided to notice, but simply something that had registered and been filed away alongside everything else his mind collected without being asked to. He said all of this without looking at the camera. He already knew where it was. Then he said, "The attendant who reported the discrepancy was in the lateral corridor for 3 minutes, between 4:07 and 4:10 in the afternoon." He said he had not timed this intentionally. He said he had simply noticed the attendant leave and registered the time on the clock above the reception desk, and noticed the attendant return and registered that time also, because that was what his mind did. He said the corridor cameras, unlike the concierge camera, were functioning at their correct angle. He said he could be wrong. He said the footage would show whether he was. He stopped. He did not add anything. He did not repeat himself. He did not look at Price with triumph or with anger or with any of the emotions that the moment might have justified. He looked at him with the same steady, unhurried attention he had been giving him since the beginning. The look of a boy who has learned that the world will often refuse to see what is directly in front of it, and who has decided to keep showing it anyway. Gerald Price's face had moved through several expressions in the space of those few sentences, and none of them were ones he would have chosen to wear in public. There had been surprise, which he covered quickly. There had been something close to embarrassment, which he covered less quickly. And underneath both of those, moving slowly to the surface like something dredged up from deeper water, there was anger. Not the righteous kind, not the kind that comes from being wronged, but the smaller and uglier kind that comes from being seen. He said, "You're making that up." He said it with the authority of a man who has spent enough years in rooms where his authority was not questioned that he has begun to confuse authority with truth. He said, "A child doesn't pay attention to things like that." Elijah said, "I pay attention to everything, sir." And then the elevator opened. Chaewon Park did not enter a room. He arrived in it. There was a difference, and every person in the lobby felt it before they had time to understand why. The way a change in atmospheric pressure is felt in the body before it registers in the mind. He came through the elevator doors with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had long since stopped moving quickly for anyone, his 2 bodyguards half a step behind him and half a world away in presence, their gray suits and careful eyes making them furniture, while he remained unmistakably the room's new center of gravity. He was crossing toward the exit when the silence reached him. Not the silence of an empty space, the silence of a space holding something, the specific acoustic weight of a confrontation that has drawn every person nearby into its orbit without moving their feet. Chaewon Park had spent enough years in enough rooms where a silence meant something to know the difference between the silence of nothing happening and the silence of something happening that people have decided not to look at directly. He stopped. His eyes moved across the lobby with the economy of a man who processes quickly and reacts slowly. And they found, in sequence, the receptionist who had stopped typing and was staring at her screen without seeing it, the bellboy who had set down a bag and not picked it up again, the 2 guests near the fountain who were watching the center of the room from the corners of their eyes, and then, at the center of all of it, a boy. A 12-year-old boy, standing straight, backpack on his shoulders, looking at a man in a gray suit, with an expression that Chaewon Park recognized the way a person recognizes a language they learned before they learned words. He had worn that expression himself once, in a different country, in a different life. In a hallway outside a room where men with authority were deciding something about him that he had not been invited to dispute. He had been older than 12. He had not stood as straight. One of his bodyguards leaned close and spoke quietly in Korean. A brief assessment. The manager, the maid, the boy, the missing bill, the accusation. The kind of summary that strips a situation to its bones. Chae-won listened without turning his head. Then he spoke. He asked Price what the accusation was. Price straightened. He pivoted toward the VIP guest with the reflexive deference of a man whose entire professional identity is organized around the management of wealthy people's comfort. And he began to explain. The reasonable voice again, the managerial tone again, the word routine again. And Chae-won let him speak for exactly 4 seconds before he asked the question again. Not louder, slower. What was the accusation? Price stopped. Chae-won turned to the bodyguard on his left and said something in Korean. The bodyguard walked to the reception desk. He was there for less than a minute. He returned and spoke again, quietly, in Korean. And what he said were the words that Loretta Hayes had already spoken. The camera angle, the corridor, the 3 minutes, the timestamps. Repeated back with the addition of one piece of information that the bodyguard had obtained from the desk in the time it had taken Price to straighten his tie. The lateral corridor cameras had recorded at 4:07 and 4:10. Chae-won closed his eyes for one breath. When he opened them, Gerald Price was already beginning to understand what kind of story this was going to be. The attendant was brought forward. It did not take long. It never takes long when the architecture of a lie is already exposed and the only thing remaining is the formality of its collapse. The young man came from behind the concierge desk with the particular walk of someone whose body has already confessed before his mouth has been given the chance. His shoulders forward, his eyes finding the floor and staying there, his hands doing nothing useful at his sides. He was 23 years old, and he had made a decision that afternoon that had seemed, in the moment, like the kind of small and consequence-free dishonesty that disappears into the noise of a busy day. He had not anticipated that the noise would go quiet. The note was in the pocket of his apron, folded once, still crisp. The head of hotel security, a broad, careful man who had worked the building for 11 years and had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things, unfolded it and held it up without ceremony. And the lobby received this information in the way lobbies receive information that confirms what most of the people present had already understood. Not with shock, but with the specific and heavy silence of something being acknowledged that should have been acknowledged sooner. Gerald Price did not speak. He stood in the center of the marble floor with his gold watch and his loosened tie, and the fading authority of a man whose performance has run past the end of the stage. And he did not speak because there was nothing left in him that the reasonable voice could do with the situation. The reasonable voice required a premise. The premise was gone. What remained was a man in a gray suit standing in front of a 12-year-old boy and his mother, and every person in that lobby understanding, without it being said, exactly what had happened, and exactly why it had happened, and exactly what kind of decision had been made the moment Price had crossed the marble floor and asked, "What are you doing here, son?" Loretta Hayes looked at the manager. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand anything or accuse anyone or perform the anger that the moment had more than earned. She simply looked at him with the full and level attention of a woman who has spent 6 years being invisible to a man who has just been made to see her. And the weight of that attention was more than any sentence she could have constructed, because it required him to hold it without the relief of being responded to. He could not hold it. He looked away first. Elijah watched this happen. He watched his mother stand in her white apron and her black dress and her thin silver ring, and he watched a man who had walked across a marble floor with all the certainty of someone who had never been wrong look away from her eyes. And something moved through the boy that he would spend years trying to name. It was not satisfaction. It was not relief exactly. It was something older and quieter than both of those things. The particular ache of a wound that has just been acknowledged for the first time, which hurts differently than the wound itself, which hurts in a way that means something is beginning to close. He was still feeling it when he became aware that someone was standing in front of him. Chaewon Park had crossed the lobby without Elijah noticing, which was remarkable because Elijah noticed everything. And the fact that this man had moved through his peripheral awareness without triggering it said something about the quality of stillness the man carried with him, even in motion. He was close now, closer than Price had stood. But the distance felt entirely different. Not the compressed distance of accusation, but the open distance of attention, of one person choosing to be fully present to another without agenda. Elijah looked up at him. The tatuagins on his neck were more visible at this range, the dragons climbing the left side, the Korean characters winding between them, the ink so dark against his skin that it seemed less like decoration and more like a record of something, a history written on the body because there was no other place permanent enough to hold it. The scar under his right eye caught the chandelier light. His face was still. His eyes were not. His eyes were the eyes of a man looking at something that mattered to him. And then, Chaewon Park, the man whom 3 organizations on the eastern seaboard did not cross, the man whose silence was worth more than most men's speeches, the man who had not bowed to a government official in 14 years, inclined his head. Slowly, deliberately, all the way down and held there for a full second before he straightened. A bow of respect, unambiguous, unreserved, given to a 12-year-old boy with a NASA pin on his backpack who was standing in a hotel lobby in the rain. Elijah's composure, that extraordinary, hard-won, too-early-learned composure, broke open at the edges. Not into tears, into something that was the territory just before tears, the place where the body understands that something real has just happened before the mind has finished processing what it was. His jaw moved once. His eyes went bright. He did not look away. Chaewon straightened. He turned to Loretta. He said 4 words. "You raised him well." Then he walked to the door, and his bodyguards followed, and the revolving door turned and let in a brief rush of rain-cold air, and then closed again, and he was gone, and the lobby was left to reassemble itself around his absence, the way a room reassembles itself after something large and quiet has passed through it. Gerald Price was removed from his position 6 days later. The internal review was thorough. It found what internal reviews find when they are actually looking. A pattern, documented across 2 years, of conduct directed consistently and disproportionately toward the members of the housekeeping staff who had the least institutional protection and the fewest avenues of formal complaint. It found reports that had been filed and not acted upon. It found accommodations that had been made for the wrong reasons and withheld for reasons that were never written down because the people making the decisions had understood, without needing to discuss it, that some things are more defensible when they remain unspoken. Price left the building on a Tuesday morning, carrying a box that was mostly empty. He did not look at the lobby cameras on his way out. Loretta Hayes was promoted to floor supervisor 3 months later. The recommendation came through official channels, attributed to a general performance review, and the name of the person who had initiated the process was not included in any document that Loretta was given access to. But a card appeared on her housekeeping cart the morning after the incident. Black, unbranded, with a single line of Korean text printed on it in small, precise characters. She kept it on the kitchen table that evening, and when Elijah came in from the rain and dropped his backpack by the door, she slid it across to him without explanation and waited while he read it. He was quiet for a moment. She asked him what it said. He looked at the card for a long time before he answered, long enough that she almost asked again. And then he looked up at her. Her son, 12 years old, too serious for his age, too knowing for his years, carrying things in his eyes that no child should have to carry, and carrying them anyway with a straightness of back and a steadiness of gaze that she recognized, because she had tried, imperfectly and at great cost to herself, to put it there. And he told her. He said, "Some people understand what a person is worth. It is rarely the people who should." Loretta looked at her son across the small table in the small apartment, while the rain came down outside and the city moved through its evening without knowing or caring what had happened inside one marble lobby on one gray Thursday afternoon. And then she stopped holding the thing she had been holding since she let go of the cart and walked across that floor toward her boy. She let it go. And Elijah, for the first time in longer than either of them could have measured, did not tell her he was fine. Because he was. And they both knew it. And that, in the end, was enough. Loretta didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't explain her innocence 10 times hoping to be believed. She simply stood up. And that was enough. But how many of us are still waiting to be believed by someone who has already decided what they think of us? How many of us are still explaining our worth to someone who never intended to recognize it? If this story touched something inside you, maybe it's not a coincidence. There's a 30-day guide created specifically for women who are ready to stop diminishing themselves, stop accepting emotional crumbs, and return to themselves with clarity and dignity. It's called The Woman He Can't Manipulate. It's not about hardening, it's about becoming harder to confuse. The link is in the QR code on the screen now, or in the description, or in the pinned comment below. You've stood up for everyone else. It's time to stand up for yourself. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been in a room where someone decided what you were worth before you ever had the chance to speak? Or have you ever watched someone you love be treated as less than they are and felt that particular helplessness of knowing the truth but having no power to make others see it? And think about this. When was the last time you truly saw someone that the world had decided to overlook and chose to acknowledge them anyway? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the quiet power of truth, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.